Well, hey everybody, I'm Brandon Marcello, 24/7 Sports National College Football Reporter. Thanks for joining me. I hope audio and the video is coming through clearly. Wanted to come on here and just chat with you a little bit about my Power 5 picks, take your criticism, and I'm certainly getting it on the 24/7 Sports message boards today. I need to look right now. It's incredible the feedback we are receiving, and for that matter, fan bases are receiving as they go back and forth at each other with all these picks we made during the week across the SEC, ACC, Pac-12, Big 10, Big 12. Right now, the SEC predictions, which were posted yesterday morning, has 453 comments. Mostly Georgia and Florida fans going at it, and then Georgia fans going after me. Pac-12 are 332 comments. Pac-12, you got a little work to do to catch up here. The Big 10, Big 10's at 1,155 comments. People going back and forth there. Big 12, 55 comments. Come on, Big 12. ACC, 164 comments. So Big 12 and ACC bringing up the rear. And, hey, I guess there's not much to discuss in the ACC when you've got Clemson in your conference, and they're just beating up everybody. So, yeah. Hey, thanks, Jack. Appreciate it, man. Enjoying the new gig, and as I keep telling everybody, I'm just trying to keep my head above water, trying to keep up with everybody, and then also break any news or get some any exclusives we can. Just trying our best. That's all I can really do. Just try my best. And hopefully it's working out so far and fans are enjoying it. So I guess I'm going to start with the hot button topic of the SEC, because that has exploded here in the last day with my projections. And I'll start in the East because that's where the hot topic is. The question of Florida or Georgia winning the East and advancing the SEC championship game. I mean, make no bones about it for me. I've picked Florida, and my reason, first off, a little background behind the pick. I see that the window for Florida is this year. I don't see them being able to keep up with Georgia beyond this year if they don't pick up their recruiting. Georgia, obviously, being in the top 3 recruiting every year under Kirby Smart, you're not going to be able to keep up with that if you're Florida when you're just inside the top 10 or a little bit outside the top 10, and then you're also losing recruits before they even get on campus or a little bit after they get on campus. It's not a recipe for success. But I'll say this. Dan Mullen makes up for that with his coaching, his development, particularly on offense, of course, and even more particularly, the quarterback position. Kyle Trask has turned into a top-tier SEC quarterback, and who would have thunk it? He was like a 2-star, 3-star guy. And it's not the first time Dan Mullen's done that. Dak Prescott, who was a Heisman finalist at Mississippi State, was once a 2-star prospect, elevated to a 3-star prospect once LSU and some other bigger programs started going after him. That's Dan Mullen, man. He does a great job developing quarterbacks, and I've seen him do it over the years from afar and up close. I saw when I covered Mississippi State. He took a tight end, a player who should have been a tight end, played him at quarterback, and they won 9 games. His name was Chris Relf, and came from Montgomery, Alabama, and they turned him into a quarterback, and he did pretty well in running the ball and being able to throw it. So anyway, in the SEC East, it comes down to this for me this year. I do not believe that Florida is going to be as rounded as Georgia. But to me, it's going to come down to the quarterback position this year, and I do not trust Jamie Newman yet until I see him play against SEC competition. I've seen Kyle Trask. I had all the questions in the world about Kyle Trask when he came in for an injured Felipe Franks. But then he knocked off nationally ranked teams. He knocked off Auburn in his first SEC start at home. He knocked off Auburn, who was top 15 at the time last season. What has Jamie Newman done? He put up nice numbers in the ACC at Wake Forest, where he had 2 really good receivers. And then beyond that, those receivers got hurt, and he continued to perform well. The issue I have with him, though, is that when he faced programs with winning records, he was downright average to below average. His completion percentage dropped to about 54%, and he threw almost as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. The Clemson game especially stands out as a terrible one for him. But even if you took that game out, he's still average against teams with winning records. Now, of course, he's going to have more talent around him at Georgia. He's going to have better receivers at Georgia. But I don't see him being an elite quarterback for the Bulldogs this year. I think Kyle Trask can maybe not be elite, but be in that great category. In my eyes, for a quarterback, there's 3 categories beyond being average to below average. It's good, great, and then elite. So, for example, Joe Burrow is elite. Tua was elite. Bo Nix at Auburn last year was average to good by the end of the season. Jake Fromm, good to great. So for Florida this year, I think they got a possibility to have a quarterback with Kyle Trask who's between great and elite. I don't think he'll be elite all the time. I don't even necessarily know if he'll be great all the time. But he's going to be between great and elite on my scale. And for Jamie Newman, I think he's going to be between good and great. Yes, Georgia's defense is going to be tremendous. Dan Mullen's had a very difficult time trying to eclipse 3 touchdowns, or at least get to 3 touchdowns against Georgia over the years. But if there is a window in this rivalry for Florida to knock off Georgia, it's this year. Now, that window is not going to stay open in 2021 because I think JT Daniels is better than Newman at quarterback. And as I said, the aforementioned recruiting. Georgia is just kicking the tail of everybody other than Alabama and LSU at times on the recruiting trail. They're just kicking their tail. Florida can't keep up with that right now unless Dan Mullen just absolutely ramps things up and makes some changes maybe on his staff at least, or at least shifts some recruiting focus among some of his staff members. But right now, I see Florida knocking off Georgia. A lot of Georgia fans are upset about that on our blue board, message board at 247sports.com. Like I said, we're up to 453 comments, and like every single one of them are heated. But I like Florida. I actually think Florida's running game is going to be a little bit better this year, which is going to allow them to be more balanced in the passing game. I like Kyle Trask and what he's been able to do. And then what do you do with Emory Jones? I know, to me, he's like the ultimate Wildcat guy for Dan Mullen that comes in as a change of pace guy, can throw it, but it can run it and get them a few yards. In fact, against Auburn last season, the one game I covered that involved Florida last season, Emory Jones coming in and mixing it up is really what kind of got Auburn off balance in that game, and it'll keep a lot of teams off balance this season. Georgia doesn't have that. So, again, advantage to Florida at the quarterback position. Tennessee, I've got third. I think it's going to be a battle between them and Kentucky for third place in the SEC East. Does that mean Tennessee's back? By no stretch of the imagination, no. Jarrett Garantano is average. He's not good, and he's not great, and he's not elite on my scale. He's average. Until Tennessee gets a great quarterback, they're not going to be able to contend for that number 2 spot, which will likely be against Georgia for the foreseeable future, which would mean, getting to like 9 wins, 10 wins, things like that on a more consistent basis. Tennessee's offensive line might be the best in the SEC this year. It might be, but their quarterback is certainly in the middle of the pack to me. Kentucky, at some point, Mark Stoops is going to get hired away, right? It has to happen. He's going to get picked up by some big school. And I was talking to Trey Scott about this on our College Football Daily podcast. Ohio State would make a lot of sense for him, but Michigan might even make more sense for him if the Jim Harbaugh era were to come to a close after this season or even the next couple of years. Obviously, Mark Stoops has done a tremendous job recruiting the state of Ohio at Kentucky, and that's helped turn around their program. And if he goes to Michigan and can do the same, I think Mark Stoops would be a tremendous fit there. And it'd be silly if he wasn't like one of the first phone calls Michigan makes if there was a coaching change. Terry Wilson comes back at quarterback after being injured last season. Of course, that opened the door for Lynn Bowden to come in. And, oh, man, Lynn was amazing. Worthy of All-American consideration, as we all know, and what he was able to do running the ball. But here's the thing. Kentucky returned 73% of its production on offense and defense last year, which ranks 25th nationally. They got so many returning starters, a lot of production returning. I like Kentucky to be kind of a borderline top 25 team this year, and I think it'll be between them and Tennessee for that third spot. South Carolina, on the other hand, I don't know. I've got South Carolina ranked 5th because of what they've got coming back, and I think Ryan Helinski is a good quarterback. I just don't know if I don't trust Will Muschamp as a head coach. A lot of you know that about me if you've followed me over the years, including my time at Auburn. I just don't trust him as a head coach. And this is what you can count on with Will Muschamp. No matter what he's coaching, if he's a defensive coordinator or a head coach, he's going to have a good secondary. Other than that, what else can you count on with Will Muschamp? That victory against Georgia last season was amazing. But they didn't do anything else last year, as we all know. This season, I think it's going to be a struggle for them. I hesitated maybe putting them at 6th in the SEC East, but I think they'll do enough to finish in that area. And even so, finishing 5th in the SEC East, that might end up costing Will Muschamp his job anyway. Meanwhile, you got Eli Drinkowitz, new coach at Mizzou. Obviously didn't get a lot of time to actually work with his players hands-on for spring practices because of the coronavirus. But that offense can't get much worse than it was last year after Kelly Bryant went down with injury at quarterback. They were 93rd nationally in scoring. You would think that would improve under Drinkowitz. Him and Curtis Looper kind of teaming up to take over that offense. We'll see. The defense will be good. It'll be good. They ranked 15th nationally in scoring defense last year. And most of the two deep return, though they lose a few starters, but most of the two deep return, which is very helpful. So, I mean, heck, that's why I struggled. That's why I struggled with South Carolina and Mizzou, maybe flip-flopping them because of Mizzou's defense and the potential of the offense just improving a little bit, which I think it will under Drinkowitz. So, Mizzou could be a team that gets to a bowl game. We'll see. But they got to figure out the quarterback situation. Taylor Powell's the only one with experience that was on the Mizzou roster coming back. And then, of course, they got TCU transfer Sean Robinson. That'll be a quarterback battle they got to figure out in the month of August. Then Vanderbilt, it's a mess. You guys know that if you pay attention to Vanderbilt. Nothing against Vanderbilt. We've obviously seen what they're capable of doing in previous coaching regimes. But under Derek Mason, they just haven't quite got it done. They've been to one bowl game, but finished 6-7. They haven't had a winning season, technically. And their quarterback situation might be one of the worst in the Power 5. They had 3 guys leave. Todd Fitch comes in from Louisiana Tech to be the OC. Ted Roof is back in the SEC for what seems like the 3,000th time. Both Fitch and Roof have been coaching for years, like 30-plus years apiece, and have been at about a dozen schools apiece as well. Having veteran coaches is good at times, but sometimes when you're a veteran coach and you hop from job to job, there's a reason for it. And landing at Vanderbilt late in your career is not necessarily obviously not a promotion, but it's obviously not a situation where you're going, hey, I'm here because I'm going to rebuild yet another program. I think this will probably end up being the last year of the Derek Mason era, though. If we don't get a full season in, maybe he stays around a little bit. Plus, with the financial situations at all these schools, with limited attendance and maybe some games being canceled, we don't know all that. We don't know what's going to happen. But with the belt tightening at most of these schools financially, you might see some coaches sticking around that usually you wouldn't see, and maybe Derek Mason would be one, but with the way he's been losing lately, and then the situation they have a quarterback and their defense being so terrible, I don't see them making drastic enough improvement to be able for him to keep his job. But we'll see. Then we move on to the West Division. I think Alabama is by far the class of the SEC this year. I think they're going to just absolutely whip up on people, to be quite honest. I think the closest game they might play would end up being like maybe a touchdown. I don't think anybody's going to be coming down in the final 4 minutes with a chance to beat Alabama this season, at least during the regular season. I think Alabama is just going to absolutely destroy some folks. That's without Tua. Mac Jones, I've seen him play in person a couple times. The guy's a real deal. And I think this idea of, maybe Bryce Young, the newcomer, come in and kind of light the world on fire. Nah, I don't see it. Mac Jones is the real deal. I think he completed about 68% of his passes last season. He played quite a bit, even before Tua went down with the injury. He played a lot in the fourth quarter of games because the backups were coming in and all those blowouts they had. And then, of course, he took over the starting role in the final month of the season and performed very well. He made some mistakes in the Iron Bowl, but still was putting up big yardage, and he was helped by obviously a great receiving core. And here's the thing. They lose Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, but they're still stacked at receiver. I think Jalen Waddell is going to be a household name this year. He only had 560 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. He's kind of a gadget receiver, a guy who could do sweeps and all that stuff running out of the backfield as well. But he is super fast, super quick, returns kicks, returned one for a touchdown in the Iron Bowl last year. The guy is going to be a superstar on the college football landscape this year. And, of course, not only that, you got him coming back, but you got Devontae Smith. They're going to be stacked on offense. And I think the player of the year, and in fact, the player of the year I picked in the SEC is Najee Harris, the running back. I think he's got an opportunity, if they don't split carries a lot, to potentially get up to like 1,700 yards or so and rushing. And if he does that and Alabama gets to an SEC championship game, I think he's going to definitely be in the Heisman conversation. Though, as I've discussed in my picks previously at 24/7 Sports about the Big Ten, which we'll get to, I think that Justin Fields, obviously you see in Las Vegas, is the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. But with that schedule they have, he definitely has an opportunity to put up huge numbers that make him possibly a shoo-in to win the Heisman by the time we hit the month of November in the schedule. Yeah, Alabama is just stacked. I mean, you just look at their roster, is incredible. And here's the other thing. I don't think this gets talked about enough. We know something seemed off with Alabama's defense last year, and that was mostly because of injuries to the linebacker spots. Some of those guys return. But the other thing is, that was the worst defense under Nick Saban at Alabama in 10-plus years. And it's still ranked 13th nationally in scoring defense. It's going to be better this year. They're going to play championship-level football. They were one win away from going to the SEC championship game last year and would have probably made the playoff. Or actually, there were 2 games away because of the LSU loss and the Auburn loss. So 2 games away. But this year, they don't have an LSU to deal with. They get Auburn at home, and Auburn's been unable to beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa in the Gus Malzahn era. So I think Alabama's going to easily run away in the SEC West and win the championship. Now, a lot of people are picking LSU in their top 10, maybe number 2 in the SEC, but I just don't see LSU is not equipped like Alabama to come in and like reload after having 14 draft picks selected, including a once-in-a-generation quarterback like Joe Burrow, a tremendous running back who was severely underrated, tremendous receivers, though, as we all know, they're still stacked at the receiver spot. But Miles Brennan comes in at quarterback. They lose Joe Brady as their co-offensive coordinator, really kind of revamped things with the passing scheme, the passing tree, and everything, and worked with Joe Burrow closely. And the other thing that I consider about Joe Burrow is like he was almost playing like a professional last year, not just on the field, but also off the field. He was taking online classes, was living off campus, was barely ever on campus, and was just pretty much keeping football 24/7 at the forefront for him. Miles Brennan is not going to have that luxury this year, and he's going to do so without Joe Brady there. I think the running game will be okay. They've got several prospects back there that could potentially take over. I think it'll be maybe a committee approach. Former 5-star prospect John Emery Jr. is a guy that can really look to. But I think things will be a little too bumpy for them offensively, for them obviously to put up numbers like last year, but be able to consistently score. And I've got them finishing third just behind Auburn. Auburn gets LSU at home, and I think that was kind of the tipping point for me, was like that game that LSU has to go on the road for. Not only that, but they have to replace Dave Aranda at defensive coordinator. Obviously, Bo Pelini back in the SEC and back at LSU is a huge get for them. You lose Grant Delpit at safety, but you get Derek Stingley back at corner and Jacoby Stevens at safety. It's good. The team I have an issue with that everybody kind of sees as a dark horse in the SEC West is Texas A&M. I just do not see it with them, and primarily because of the inconsistent play of Kellen Mond. I've seen him in person, and I've seen him on television, of course, in some big moments, and he does not deliver. He has yet to deliver really in a big moment outside of the 2018 controversial finish in 7 overtimes against LSU, where Texas A&M was able to pull off that victory against was a above average LSU team at the time. Definitely not the LSU team we saw in 2019. But outside that, Kellen Mond really hasn't done much. He's put up good numbers, but it hasn't come through in the clutch for them. I don't see it. Isaiah Spiller could end up being a good running back for them. The defense was good, very good last season. But they gave up way too many explosive plays. Big plays that changed the aspect of games. A lot of big plays. They got to fix that. So I struggle picking Texas A&M at this point. And that's why I've got them fourth in the SEC West. Fifth, I've got Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin's going to come in and revitalize a passing game that really struggled last year, as Rich Rodriguez's offense, of course, is more focused on trying to spread things out and open things up with the run. I think one of the least talked about quarterbacks in the SEC that you got to keep an eye on is John Reese Plumlee. I've heard some people saying that it's going to be a battle between John Reese Plumlee and Matt Corral. I don't see it. I think John Reese Plumlee's their guy. He rushed for over 1,000 yards last year. Of course, only threw for about 900 in the games he played in. But I think you can build off of him and get things going. I really like him. I think Lane Kiffin could turn things around a little bit this season and get to like that 6-win mark this year with John Reese Plumlee as his quarterback. I love their receivers, even though they didn't get the ball thrown to him a lot last year. Elijah Moore, 67 catches, 850 yards last season. I think Kiffin can automatically improve that passing game in addition to what they're able to do with the running game last season. And I think that'll be enough for them to be able to get to 6 wins or so and be a postseason type team. The team with, a new coach in any conference that I think is going to struggle more than any other as far as what like expectations versus reality is Mike Leach at Mississippi State. And simply because it takes some time for his air raid to catch on wherever he goes. Washington State, it took a couple of years. Mississippi State, it might take 2 or 3 years, and it's not going to obviously happen this year. They didn't have any spring practices. The quarterback who will likely be the starter, KJ Costello, the transfer from Stanford, hasn't had an opportunity to work out with his teammates really and be able to get timing down, and that's going to hurt them as they try to install this system. Defense loses some pieces too. I just don't see it happening for Mississippi State this year. They're going to put up a lot of yardage through the air, but there's going to be a lot of turnovers too and a lot of mistakes. And how does Kylan Hill, the running back there, who is phenomenal, rushing for over 1,300 yards, how's he fit in the system? He can catch out of the backfield. We'll see. And then last place, I've got Arkansas. I mean, listen, it's a team that won 2 games. Maybe they'll win 4 this year. They just do not have SEC talent right now. It's one of the slower teams and undisciplined teams I saw last season. Incredibly bad last year. I couldn't believe it when I saw them in person, just how out of their element they seemed against almost every team they played. Rakeem Boyd comes back at running back. That's good. They get Felipe Franks, the transfer from Florida, but not having a lot of spring time together. How's that affect them? I think it's going to affect them tremendously. Sam Pittman is probably in store for a losing season his first year. Their scoring defense was abysmal last year, 124th in the nation, allowing nearly 37 points a game. I don't think the offense is going to be great. Last place in the SEC West easily for me. And as I said, SEC champion Alabama, I think they're going to run away with it. Player of the year, Najee Harris. And my game of the year is actually Florida versus Georgia. As I mentioned, I think this is the year Dan Mullen finally knocks off Kirby Smart. That's what I see. All right, let's move on, shall we? What conference you guys want to talk about next? Let's go Pac-12. Let's go completely to the West Coast. I've got Oregon, number 1 in the North Division. The popular pick to win the Pac-12 for a second straight year. Everybody's talking about Justin Herbert this, Justin Herbert that, but the big thing for Oregon, what they've been able to do under Mario Cristobal, is recruit in the trenches. And not to say like they're bringing an SEC or Big Ten philosophy into the Pac-12, but they're just building something that's maybe stronger than some other teams are accustomed to seeing in the Pac-12. I think Tyler Shaw will end up being the quarterback there. I talked to Mario Cristobal 2-3 weeks ago, and he seems pretty high on him and actually talked more about him than anybody else. 4 starters are gone along the offensive line, and it's an offensive line that Mario's thought was the best offensive line he's ever coached or even been around. And that's saying something with being in Alabama and Miami and everything, playing in Miami. They'll be fine at left tackle, of course. C.J. Verdell and Travis Dyer back in the backfield after combining for more than 1,700 yards. I think they're going to be fine on offense. Plus, you add Joe Moorhead as the offensive coordinator, the former Mississippi State head coach, former Penn State offensive coordinator, really started sparking things there offensively. Obviously, coached at Furman, got them going, and did some really innovative things for them. I think he's going to come in and really kind of change things a little bit, add his own flavor to that Oregon offense. And I was talking when Mario was talking to me, so he's very excited about some of the things they've discussed. Johnny Johnson, the third, returns at receiver. According to Pro Football Focus, I think he's the 3rd highest rated receiver in the Pac-12 last year with his 57 catches for 836 yards. As far as their grades, and I don't understand PFF's grades, to be quite honest. Do you? I don't think a lot of people trust him either. Anyway, and here's the other thing. Oregon's defense was pretty good last year. I think it's going to be even better this year. They returned 81% of their defensive production, according to ESPN's Bill Conley. And that's after ranking 2nd in scoring defense in the conference at 16.5 points per game. I think they're going to be better. Or I think Oregon wins the North Division and also the Pac-12 title. I got Cal number 2 in the North Division. We obviously know they were very good defensively. The offense was abysmal, but here's some like good news that actually could work out in their favor. Normally, like if you're really bad, you're like, oh, I don't want all those same players back. But they do return 93% of their production on offense, and that leads the country, number 1 in the country. They're 112th nationally, only scoring 21.2 points last year. Chase Garbers returns at quarterback. I think he could be good, but we'll see. Bill Musgrave's on board as a new OC. They've got to be better. Cameron Good returns on defense after averaging 9.5 sacks last season. I think Cal has a chance to be a more well-rounded team this year. The offense has got to be better than it was last year. And for that fact, I'm putting them in number 2 in the North Division of the Pac-12. Beyond that, Washington is a difficult team for me to peg, really, because of Jimmy Lake. And, you know, he comes in, obviously, as someone that's been around the program as a defensive coordinator. But you're trying to figure out what's going on at quarterback. Jacob Sermon is probably going to end up being the guy when they get out of that quarterback competition with Dylan Morris. Receivers, they've got some nice guys, but their top 2 guys, pass catchers, are not back. They'll get to a bowl game, and they might push Cal for that second spot, especially if Cal doesn't improve as much as I think they will on offense. But I think Washington's kind of just going to be in the middle of things in the North Division. Washington State, I got below them just because, you mentioned Mike Leach in the air raid. It's so difficult to transition immediately to the air raid and be uber successful as far as win-loss record. Well, he leaves Washington State, and Nick Rolovich comes in from Hawaii to do the run and shoot. And while you hear air raid and run and shoot, you're like, man, that's different. It's a lot different. Not necessarily, not as far as some of the scheme stuff they do. And I don't think the drop-off is going to be all that big. And the guy whose name you're going to be hearing a lot of is Max Borghi this year, the running back for Washington State. He had, 817 rushing yards and a team-high 86 catches in the air raid for 597 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. He's a guy who I think could be a superstar in the Pac-12 this upcoming season, and is really going to curb the learning curve, so to speak. Flatten the curve of the transition from the air raid to the run and shoot. But I still got them finishing near the bottom of the North Division. Stanford, first losing season for David Shaw last year in his 9 years there. Davis Mills returns at quarterback. The offensive line went through a lot of injuries last season, so maybe they'll be better this year. But the defense last year, especially in the trenches, was just abysmal. And then, you've heard it across Twitter. It's almost become like a running joke. They had 14 players in the transfer portal at one point. And I think 1 or 2 of them returned. And some of them obviously weren't key contributors. But obviously there's a sea of change there at Stanford. But I don't see them getting above the top half of the North Division. Oregon State, they showed improvement last season, but they have to replace their quarterback once again. 3 of their players went off to the NFL draft, and Oregon State wasn't good enough to begin with last year, and they lose 3 players on offense to the NFL draft. Defense is going to be above average, but I think they're going to fall back. I don't think they're going to be like a 5-win team this year. I think they'll probably get back to about 4 wins, 3 wins maybe. The South Division. All right. This was like my first prediction during the week that really sparked some conversation. Let me get a sip here of my Dr. Pepper. I need some caffeine, but also clear my throat. When Herm Edwards was hired at Arizona State, I, like many people, just thought it was hilarious. It seemed like he didn't know what he was talking about as far as not football, but college football and the logistics of it, building a staff, how to handle a program. I mean, Herm Edwards, obviously an NFL guy, hadn't coached in college in decades, And I just laughed. He's like, I'm going to have a general manager for football and all this stuff. And everything seemed like a joke. And he just said weird things. Well, I'm not laughing anymore. I believe in the dude. He has turned that program around culturally and the atmosphere. And I've been very impressed with what they did last season. They played a lot of close games. Only one of their losses last season was by more than 10 points. So they were in every single game practically last season. I like them. And they've got a tremendous quarterback that not a lot of people are talking about, Jaden Daniels, returning. Threw for almost 3,000 yards, 17 touchdowns against only 2 interceptions as a freshman. One of those mini freshmen last year who started at quarterback across the nation. Plus, they bring in Zach Hill, the former Boise State offensive coordinator, to take things over there. We'll see. Frank Darby returns after averaging nearly 20 yards per catch. Marvin Lewis, who is the special assistant to the head coach, has been elevated to co-defensive coordinator with a staff member, Antonio Pierce. And they've got a really good defensive front. And we talk about Oregon really being a team that's really defined things by being more physical and better along their defensive front. And I think Arizona State's got that going for them as well. So everybody's like, well, what about USC? Shouldn't they be number one? Okay, so maybe they should be number 2. No, I don't have USC even at number 2. I got Utah there, even though Utah loses a ton of production. Only 37% of the team production returns, guys. 37%. And I've still got them number 2 in the division. I might be proven to be completely in the wrong, but I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. I believe that. Tyler Huntley's got to replace a quarterback. Jake Bentley seems like to be the guy, the transfer from South Carolina. When you look at Kyle Whittingham teams, he's been there so long. He's kind of built his culture and atmosphere, like I mentioned with Herm Edwards, and has people believing, and also the personnel to where he kind of just reloads things, particularly on defense. Utah's defense was phenomenal last year. They had, how many guys they have drafted from the defense last year? Let me look here at my notes. 6 players in the NFL draft from the defense. So they're going to take a little drop off, but I still think they're going to be a top 25 defense. And to me, that's good enough in the Pac-12 to be number 2 in that division. Like I said, I think Bentley will end up being the quarterback. And here's the other thing. They got 4 really good starters returning along the offensive line, and that's going to help Bentley or whoever the quarterback is. Devin Lloyd returns after leading the Utes with 91 tackles last season, second on the team with 11 tackles for loss. So they're not losing everything on that Utah defense despite 6 guys going to the NFL draft last year. We all knew going into last year that defense was going to be special. I don't think it'll be obviously up to that level this year, but it will be a top 25 defense this season. So I've got them above USC. Utah is not going to win 11 games again this year. They might win 9, and that'll be good for second. Then I've got USC at 3, which then this has really kind of stirred up a lot of people, and I understand why. I mean, USC returned 17 starters. It's the second most starters in the Pac-12 and among the top, I think, 10 or 15 in the country as far as returning starters. Quarterback returns, we all know that. 3,500 yards, 30 touchdowns, 72% passing completion. But here's my thing. The coach, Clay Helton, I don't trust him. And I told you about how much I believe in Mario Cristobal, Herm Edwards, and Kyle Whittingham. I do not trust Clay Helton in the big moments to get it done from the sidelines and put his players in position to win. Players win games. I've said this forever. Players win games. Coaches lose them. And Clay Helton loses games. So I do not see USC winning that division or even finishing second. I've got them third. They are talented as any team in the Pac-12. It's Oregon and USC about right here as far as talent, in my opinion. The receivers are deep. I mean, they've got 3 guys coming back that combined for 2,500 yards last season. But this is something that's not being talked about a lot. Everybody's talking about all the talent returning and everything. That defense allowed a lot of plays last year, and they ranked 78th nationally in scoring defense. I'm just saying. And obviously, this does not affect the division standings for USC, but their non-conference schedule is killer. Notre Dame, of course, but they also opened the season against Alabama. And my colleague Bud Elliott has mentioned this, and also Trey Scott. If Alabama just completely obliterates USC in the opener, that could just lay them back on their back like a turtle trying to flip over for the rest of the season where they won't be able to recover, possibly. And you've seen that in the past with when Alabama drilled Florida State, though, a few years back or a couple years back, though Florida State, of course, their offensive line was terrible and remains so. So USC, not number 1, not number 2, but number 3 in the South Division. Beyond that, I've got UCLA below USC. I think Chip Kelly late last season started showing some things offensively for us. Joshua Kelly is gone at running back, but quarterback Dorian Thomas-Robinson showed some spark. 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns. Dimitri Felton is kind of their gadget guy. Defense has got to get better. Allowed 34 points per game last season. We'll see. If they don't improve and get close to a bowl game at least, Chip Kelly might be on his way out just after 3 years. We'll see. Because, I mean, yeah. Arizona, oh my gosh. They lost 7 straight games in the season last year. They started the year 4-1, then lost 7 straight. Kevin Sumlin is notorious for just melting down near the end of the season. He did it at Texas A&M. November was his kryptonite at Texas A&M. You just knew they'd fall apart, and they always did, it seemed like. And now at Arizona, he decided to start a month early in October and melt down. Grant Cannell played 8 games because of Khalil Tate being injured. He had 9 touchdowns, 1 interception. And Grant's a guy that came out of the state of Texas owning practically every record you'd want to own. He owned the state record for career passing yards, more than 16,000 yards, and touchdown 195 yards. But he's got to get a lot better on the college level. Paul Rhodes comes on board as a defensive coordinator. We'll see how that works out. I don't have much faith in Kevin Sumlin to get that thing turned around, and he will very much be on the hot seat this year. And then Colorado, they seem to be getting back on track last year, huh? When Mel Tucker leaves. And now you got former UCLA coach Carl Durrell back. I think Colorado is in for a big drop. They got to find a new quarterback, and they got to reload. So I got them last. And, of course, my Pac-12 champion, Oregon. I think they'll meet Arizona State in the Pac-12 title game, and I think they'll cruise to a win. I think C.J. Verdell will end up being the player of the year. You're noticing a trend here. I'm going more with running backs than I have quarterbacks for player of the year in these conferences so far in the SEC and Pac-12. I got that much confidence in him. Game of the year, USC at Oregon. Yes, USC's probably, in my opinion, would be third in their division. But that's the game where they have to go to Oregon November 7th, and that's their chance to prove that they're back, so to speak. So that's my game of the year in the Pac-12. If you guys have any questions while I'm talking here, thanks for the 142 of you here. Feel free to weigh in and share your comments or questions below, and I'll get to them. I'm going to try and move through these a little bit faster because obviously I'm spending a lot of time on this. And you can listen to more of my breakdowns on the College Football Daily podcast on Apple, on iTunes, Google Play, anything that you listen to, Spotify. Let's move to the Big Ten. Move to Big Ten country. In the East, the Beast, the East. I've got Ohio State over Penn State, though I'm struggling with that. And we'll talk about here in a second, but I think Penn State's got an opportunity to knock off Ohio State this year. But the winner of the Ohio State-Penn State game to me is going to be the national champion this year. Ohio State, oh my goodness gracious, our load. J.K. Dobbins is gone, but so is Chase Young, but Justin Fields back at quarterback. I mean, that offense averaged 47 points a game last year. I do wonder about the running back spot with Dobbins gone. Master Teague is coming back from injury. Will he be fully healthy when the season starts? We'll see. And then you also got an Oklahoma transfer, Trey Sermon, who was highly rated, but he's dealt with a lot of injuries in his career. Is he going to be able to play? Apparently, he's been participating in voluntary workouts and looks good here in this last few days. But we'll see when they actually get to practices in mid-July when they do walkthroughs, and then, of course, preseason camp in August. And the defense loses a lot. Like I mentioned, Chase Young, we all know about him, but they also 5 defensive backs. But here, the thing I like about Ohio State, not just the talent, but Ryan Day seems to be doing what Urban Meyer was unable to do in his last, year or so plus at Ohio State, and also even at Florida. It seems like his teams are not focused, laser focused on things. And last year, Ohio State seemed laser focused under Ryan Day. And to me, with the stars they've got coming back, a loaded roster, and the way they went out in the college football playoff against Clemson, I think they're going to come back hungry and even more focused under Ryan Day once again. And I think they'll end up winning the Big Ten and the national championship later. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll move forward here. I got Penn State at number 2, though I think they have a chance. It's not big. They have a chance to knock off Ohio State this year in Happy Valley. Sean Clifford's back at quarterback. I think with the Minnesota offensive coordinator coming into Penn State, there's an opportunity here for Sean Clifford. Hey, maybe he can make a jump like Tanner Morgan did. It's going to be difficult to replicate, but him being a dual threat guy, Sean Clifford, he's got an opportunity to kind of eclipse 300 yards a game on average. And if they do that, Penn State's going to be a contender in my eyes. 4 starters are back along the offensive line, which obviously helps him in their situation there. Tight end Pat Fairmouth comes back. But there's not much else as far as returning receivers. We'll see what happens there. I like the secondary. Plenty of veterans there. But they allow like 250 yards per game through the air last season. That's got to improve, especially when they play a team like Ohio State, as mentioned, with Justin Fields. But here's the thing. Like, they allowed all those yards, but they only allowed 10 touchdowns through the air, and they also picked off 10 passes to negate it in a way. All right, beyond Penn State, but the big game is it's Penn State, Ohio State. Beyond that, I got Michigan third. I got way too many questions about them to make them even a challenger in the East. I think there's a big gap, not a big gap, but there's quite a gap between Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan right now. They don't know who their quarterback's going to be. One starter returns along the offensive line. You got Ronnie Bell returning at receiver with 48 catches. But Tariq Black transferred to Texas, as you guys all know. That was very out there. Josh Gaddis returns as the offensive coordinator. Maybe we could provide more consistency there. But, having to find a new quarterback and then replace some receivers and everything in a situation that wasn't all that great to begin with, I don't know. The Michigan defense is going to be pretty good. The only issue I have there is their quarterback situation. And the schedule is tough. They open the season. Obviously, it's not a Big Ten game, but it will be out in Pac-12 country. They have to go to Washington. And then they also have to go to Minnesota, go to Ohio State. Those to me are losses. In fact, I think the trip to Washington could potentially be a loss. So that's 3 losses right out the gate right there. But the season will be defined in back-to-back weeks when they have to play Wisconsin and Penn State in the 4th and 5th weeks of the season. So you're looking at a team that could have as many, I think, as 5 losses in Michigan. But maybe they'll be better. I got Indiana below Michigan right now. I think it plays spoiler because they've got 8 starters returning to the 3rd best offense of the Big Ten from last season. Michael Penix returns at quarterback after a shoulder injury. Secondary's older. Team's leading tacklers back. Mike Locksley, I think, made a great decision in having Joker Phillips and Scotty Montgomery on as co-coordinators on the offense. I want to see if 5-star Raheem Jarrett, the receiver, ends up being an instant impact guy and a big-time player for them. And the other thing is, like, watch out for Maryland, like, in 2 years. If they continue to recruit the way they have been under Mike Locksley, this could be a team that not necessarily comes out of nowhere, but a team that is rising to the point where maybe they're challenging Penn State for that 2nd spot in the division. Mel Tucker, as we mentioned earlier, left Colorado. He's now at Michigan State, taking over from Mark D'Antonio. They got to replace a 3-year starter at quarterback. It's wide open race there. Top 3 receivers are gone. The offense only averaged 3 touchdowns a game last season, even with those guys, and they're gone. And the Spartans were tied for last with 24 turnovers in the Big Ten last year. Cut down the turnovers, get better quarterback play. Maybe this is a team that finishes higher, but I got them 2nd to last in the division. And, of course, last in the division, I've got Rutgers with Greg Schiano in his 2nd stint, returning back to Rutgers. I'm actually surprised they're starting workouts on Monday. I thought that they would wait a little bit longer because New Jersey is such kind of a hot spot for the coronavirus right now. But Rutgers has been helping develop testing. They developed a saliva test for the COVID-19 tests, and the players were allowed to do them at home by themselves before they return to campus. So they're starting workouts with most of the conference on June 15th, which was quite surprising to me. They're doing well recruiting. They're in the top 20 right now, but it's not going to help them this year. We'll see what happens there in 2 or 3 years. Rutgers last in the division. We go to the West Division. Is it Wisconsin or Minnesota? I got Wisconsin. I got the Badgers. Even though they have to replace Jonathan Taylor, a 2,000-yard rusher, and then 3 starting offensive linemen. But Wisconsin seemingly has this like next man up mentality along the offensive line at running back over the years, as we all know. Nakia Watson returns at running back. Maybe he can get it done. Quarterback will be interesting. Jack Cohn completed nearly 70% of his passes. But there's some push out there for Graham Mertz to potentially be the guy. If Jack loses a couple of games that he shouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised if they make a change. But we'll see. Mertz is the highest rated quarterback to ever sign with the Badgers. He's ranked number 3 as a pro-style quarterback in the class of 2019. So you got a lot of people pushing for him. But I would think that Paul Chris would stick with Jack, before going to Graham. Maybe they utilize him in some special packages this year. 2 linebackers are gone after combining for 33.5 tackles for loss and 24 sacks last season. Zach Bond and Chris Orr. But we'll see. I still got them ranked high. I like their schedule. They have to go to Michigan, which is definitely beatable. And they host Notre Dame and Minnesota. And hosting Minnesota, which I believe is the other real threat to them in the division, getting that home game is everything. And it's in mid-October. I think Minnesota could potentially get to double-digit wins this year. But I've got them finishing second in the division. They got a great schedule. Really great schedule. Tanner Morgan's back at quarterback. I called him like the North's Joe Burrow last season. I thought he was making strides and was a tremendous passer. I saw him in the Outback Bowl in person. Obviously, he had two great receivers to throw to. He lost one of them, but he gets Rashad Bateman back. 6 starters are back on the defense. I think Minnesota's built to contend in the Big Ten once again. 9 starters back on offense, but they lose a big-time receiver, as I mentioned. We'll see. Running back situation, I think will be fine at. Beyond that, I got Iowa at 3rd. We did our 24/7 Sports Top 25 with our national panel, and I was the only person that ranked Iowa. I had them at, I think, 21. They lose Nate Stanley, lose AJ, the sack leader. How many sacks do you have? 11 and a half. But I go back to having an experienced coach and recruiting and everything, and I think they've done enough to be able to still compete. 4 returning starters along the offensive line, which is everything to Iowa. I think they'll be fine. The issue for them, and it goes beyond football, it's just the off-the-field situation with the allegations of systemic racism with the strength and conditioning program. We'll see what happens with that, what the fallout is, and how the players react once they get back to workouts and actually preparing for the season around their coaches. I don't see Iowa winning 10 games for a second straight year, though. But I still think that they're worthy of being in the top 25. I think they're a team that could lose 4 games, but because of their tough schedule, isn't necessarily not a top 25 team, if that makes sense. I think they still will be top 25 worthy. Northwestern has a lot of issues to fix. Their offense was terrible last year, averaging less than 300 yards and 16.3 points per game last year. In fact, they only averaged 12.7 points per game in the conference against Big Ten opponents last year. Peyton Ramsey, the Indiana transfer, might end up being the answer for them at quarterback. We'll see. They were just terrible last year on offense. They got to get better. Pat Fitzgerald is better than that. You would think they'd be better this season, but I got them finishing 4th behind Iowa. 5th, I've got Nebraska. I think they'll challenge to get to a bowl game after a 9-15 start under Scott Frost. The former UCF coach who's come in. Everybody believes that it's going to turn things around. I'm not completely sold on them right now. And I was doing some counting here. What did I have? 14 players, including 6 receivers, were booted or left the team early to seek transfer options or professional opportunities outside football. Some guys just left football to go do something else outside of sports. How does Adrian Martinez do at quarterback returning there? He threw 10 touchdowns last season, but had 9 picks. Receiving core is very young, and as I said, they had 6 guys at receiver leave the team or get booted in the offseason. So maybe they'll challenge for a bowl record, but I think it'll be tough for them. I don't see Nebraska getting it done all that well this year, and I think you'll start hearing about Scott Frost's seat warming up a little bit. Below that, this team is the most interesting one in the Big Ten to me. That's Purdue. They get Rondell Moore back, the electric gadget player. So fast, so quick, but I don't think Purdue is fast and quick enough at other spots on the field to me. They got to find a new quarterback. The receiving core is loaded. And the defense was not good last year. They allowed more than 30 points per game, so we'll see. Lovie Smith's back at Illinois after leading them to a bowl game, but it was a bowl loss. I think they fall all the way down in the division. And we start talking about hot seat stuff again with Lovie Smith for the Fighting Illini. My Big Ten champion, Ohio State. I think they'll be able to hold off Penn State and Happy Valley, though that game is my game of the year in the Pac-12, and I keep saying Pac-12 because we just got done talking about them. The Big Ten, and I think they will potentially have the game of the year nationally. Ohio State and Penn State. On October 24th. My Big Ten player of the year is Justin Fields, without a doubt to me. I think he throws for more 3,000, runs for 400 more once again this year, and ends up winning the Heisman Trophy. So that's my Big Ten picks. Like I said, feel free to weigh in if you guys have any questions. Big 12. Got Big 12 and ACC left. Big 12 to me is it's another issue I have. I guess it's like the former Blue Bloods and the elite that I have maybe an issue with USC and Texas. I don't see Texas winning the Big 12 this year, challenging Oklahoma, despite Oklahoma going with Spencer Rattler at quarterback and some people thinking that maybe Oklahoma takes a step back. And I think Oklahoma will take a small step back this year, but I still think they're going to win the Big 12. Let me pull up my phone here. Let me pull up Periscope. Make sure I'm not missing any comments. But I got Oklahoma winning the Big 12. I don't think that's going to be an issue for them because I don't see Texas really being the challenger to them. I think the challenger to them is going to be Oklahoma State. These last two seasons under Mike Gundy have been below average, not expected from them. You're used to seeing them challenge for double-digit wins, but I think Oklahoma State's going to step back up this year with the pieces they have. In the state of Oklahoma this year, it's Spencer's for hire, is what I'm saying, with Spencer Rattler and Spencer Sanders. But, I mean, Oklahoma's still too loaded to me to be able to take a big step back. I think they take a small step back. It's interesting. Spencer Rattler being the first non-transfer starting quarterback under Lincoln Riley as the head coach. I still think they'd be good. They lost C.D. Lamb, of course, an explosive, amazing receiver, 1,300 yards. Charleston Rambo returns, who's great in space. All five starters along the offensive line return, and everything in the trenches everything in the trenches for them is what's going to win them some games this year, even in those tight games. I think they'll still be a top 10 scoring team, and maybe a top 5 scoring team. We'll see how Rattler responds to extended action. It'll ultimately be up to him to see how good this Oklahoma team could be this year. I could see them losing 2 games this year in the regular season, but still win the Big 12. The Big 12 might have the best quarterbacks in the country this year as far as all conferences. Just way too many signal callers. But when it comes to, I'll talk about Texas in a minute. But Oklahoma State, not only was Spencer Sanders coming back at quarterback, who is going to improve and jump up. He missed the final 2 games last season because of an injury, but they've got Chuba Hubbard back at running back. The guy is phenomenal. He rushed for more than 2,000 yards last season, and you add that to a powered up passing game with Spencer Sanders back and Tylan Wallace, an All-American candidate. I think Oklahoma State's going to make a big jump this year. And I think they're going to unseat Texas for the number 2 spot and as a top challenger to Oklahoma this year. Their toughest game is in Norman for Bedlam, but they host Iowa State and the big one here, they host Texas. So I got Oklahoma State over Texas. Now with Texas, it's almost like I'm trying to compare Texas to someone. Texas and USC is similar in a lot of ways to me. Tom Herman's a better coach than Clay Helton. I'll say that. Sam Ehlinger was one of 6 quarterbacks in the same season to throw for 25 touchdowns and rush for 15 more. The other 5 have previously won the Heisman Trophy. That's a great stat that I picked up from Texas's website. But is that enough to win the Big 12 this year? I don't think he wins the Heisman Trophy, and I don't think he wins the Big 12 this year. 2 of the 3 toughest games of the season are at the tail end of the schedule, going to Iowa State and Oklahoma State, as I mentioned earlier. They lose Devin Duvernay, who had 106 catches for 1,386 yards last season. That's a big loss to that offense. But the defense has a lot of starters returning and could be better after not doing so well. They're 98th in yards per play allowed last season, but they returned 9 starters. Defensive coordinator Chris Ash is going to have to switch, or not going to have to. He's going to switch from a 3-4 base scheme to a 4-3. That'd be interesting in the more pass-heavy Big 12. Not a lot of consistency on the staff. They made 6 changes on this coaching staff, which during a time like this makes me wonder and worry about cohesion with players and concepts. We'll see. But that's why I've got Oklahoma State above. Consistency, some really big star players, and an offense that seems to be destined for a big jump forward this year. And they get Texas at home. Oklahoma State does. Iowa State, a team that a lot of people believe is probably going to be a top 25 program this year. I got them below Texas and Oklahoma State right now. Brock Purdy was one of just 4 players last year to run for 27 touchdowns and run for 8 scores last season. The others were Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, and Trevor Lawrence, which is great company to be in. We'll see how they perform against the upper tier. Got to play in some close games and win them if you're an elite quarterback. As I mentioned, you got good quarterbacks, great quarterbacks, and elite quarterbacks. Can he get to that elite level? I'm not so sure. TCU, that can go either way. You know, I've heard some people concerned about Gary Patterson kind of ending the twilight of his career potentially, and he's bringing all his friends on board to help him coach, and his latest friend being Jerry Kill, maybe his best friend, the former Minnesota head coach. He was a special assistant and consultant at Virginia Tech. Offensive guys come in, and he's told him as a special assistant, hey, you're pretty much the head coach of the offense. And that's what they need help at. We'll see. I don't know. Dave Aranda at Baylor is interesting because I'm not so certain that Baylor is going to drop off as significantly as maybe you would see in a first-year turnover because, one, Matt Rule wasn't fired. He left for the NFL. They returned some good guys. Dave Aranda is a really great defensive coach. They've already got a great culture at Baylor because of Matt Rule. So I think Baylor will be fine. Max Duggan's a guy that Jerry Kill really liked. When did I talk to Jerry Kill? Like almost a month ago. Maybe it was a month ago. Maybe over a month ago. He really likes Max Duggan. He threw for more than 2,000 yards last season, 15 touchdowns, but then there was those 10 interceptions. So we'll see. The TCU offense was just terrible last season. They lose their 2 leading rushers from that team. And then to me, this is the one that at number 8, everybody, like Kansas fans, were ecstatic to hear this. I got Kansas finishing 8th in the Big 12. Kansas hasn't finished 8th or higher in the Big 12 since 2008. That's nuts. But I really like Brent Dearman, the offensive coordinator, and when they brought him in as a full-time offensive coordinator later in the season last season, that offense went to another level. If you go watch that Texas game from last season, you know what I'm talking about. I think the offense is going to be good in spite of some of the talent because of Brent Dearman, and I think they might pull off a couple of upsets this year and be able to get out of the cellar of the Big 12 and finish 8th or so. So I guess it wasn't clear on my predicted order finish other than the top half of the conference. I got Oklahoma at 1, Oklahoma State at 2, Texas at 3, Iowa State at 4, TCU 5, Baylor 6, Kansas State at 7, Kansas at 8, West Virginia at 9, Texas Tech at 10. I don't have any confidence in Tech this year. Big play, 12 player of the year, another running back, Chuba Hubbard. Game of the year, Bedlam. I don't see how that is not going to be the game of the year, at least on my picks. I think Oklahoma State's going to surprise some people and be a top 15 team, not just a top 15 team, but potentially challenge Oklahoma, because I don't think Oklahoma's going to be a top 5 or top 6 or even top 8 team in the country this year. I think they'll be like top 15, top 10 themselves, and Oklahoma State's got an opportunity there to knock them off. All right, final conference, and then I'll take any questions you guys might have. The ACC, we go the Atlantic and the ACC. I mean, Clemson's number 1. Why wouldn't they be? The big question there, of course, is they lost Justin Ross, their top-tier receiver, amazing receiver, with some type of spinal issue that they just discovered through x-rays. He had surgery, actually, I think, last week, and is recovering, but there's the question of if he's ever going to be able to play football again because of that deformity in his back. And that's huge. That's a huge loss for them, but, I mean, they're still freaking just stacked. You got Trevor Lawrence, who, along with Justin Fields, is among the top Heisman Trophy candidates. Brent Venables might actually have the best defense in his history there at Clemson, which is saying something, particularly over these last 6-7 years. All but one player from the 2 deep on the defensive line return. So talk all you want about the Clemson offense and how amazing it is, and it is amazing. And they lose Justin Ross, which will be a bit of an issue. But the schedule's so easy. I mean, Florida State, Boston College on the road. Their biggest game of the year is out of the conference, and that's at Notre Dame in South Bend. And that game will challenge, I think, Penn State, Ohio State as the game of the year. So we'll see. Louisville, I got second. Scott Satterfield did an amazing job at Louisville last year in his first season out of App State. Pass protection is going to have to improve to be able to contend for the Atlantic title, but I don't see anybody contending for the Atlantic title other than Clemson. Running game was explosive last year, despite them having to be very creative in the running game last season. They got a pretty good group of receivers. The offensive line, an issue. Defense, an issue. They were the 6th worst group on defense among Power 5 teams last season, allowing 33.4 points per game. And to me, to be a championship level team in the ACC, you got to be at 21 points or less on scoring defense. You don't have to be like SEC level where you're allowing 15, 14, 13 points a game. You got to be at 21 points per game to win the ACC. So I don't see that. But I see them overcoming Florida State to finish for that number 2 spot. Number 3 spot, I have Florida State right now. I think Mike Norvell gets Florida State to a bowl game. I don't think Florida State's offensive line is as terrible as maybe some people think going into this year. I think they're going to be better there, and they'll be better overall because of Mike Norvell. At 4, I've got Wake Forest. Obviously, they lose Jamie Newman at quarterback and a couple of receivers. Boston College at 5. Syracuse at 6. North Carolina State at 7. Moving on to the Coastal. I got North Carolina winning the Coastal and going to the ACC Championship game to face Clemson. They do not get Clemson on the regular season schedule like they did last year when they almost upset Clemson. Sam Howell, the freshman phenom quarterback, what can you say about him? He's amazing. If he takes another step forward from what he did last season, this North Carolina team is really going to be tremendous. They might be a top 10 team by the end of the year. This air raid offense is, one, fun to watch, but with Sam Howell, it just fits perfectly. Threw a school record 38 touchdowns last season. Both of the top tailbacks returned last season. Michael Carter had over 1,000 yards last season. That's obviously a big help for them. Defense is going to be average. That's going to be good enough. As I mentioned, 21 points is kind of what you need to be a championship caliber defense in the ACC. Virginia Tech, I've got right behind them at number 2. Some people are kind of picking Miami as a dark horse. I'm not quite seeing it in the second year of the Manny Diaz era. The offense should be better with Brett Lashley coming in as the offensive coordinator from SMU and previously UConn and Auburn. And Derek King coming in as the quarterback from Houston. They will be better offensively, but I've got them 3rd in the Coastal. Beyond that, I've got Georgia Tech with Jeff Collins. I think he's building something pretty good there where they're going to be able to compete to be in the top half of the ACC every year. Duke, beyond that, they lose some pieces that are going to hurt them a little bit. Pitt, falling. And I think the team in the Power 5 that will fall the hardest this season after going to a New Year's Six game last year is Virginia. Way too many pieces missing, and I think they'd make a drop and miss out on a bowl game and actually have a losing season. My ACC champion, Clemson. Player of the year, Trevor Lawrence. Hey, not a running back. I got Trevor Lawrence winning it, going away, and player of the year. Game of the year is difficult. I could easily just say the ACC championship game between North Carolina and Clemson, but we don't know if that's going to happen. So we limit it to regular season. So I'm sticking with Clemson at Florida State on October 10th. It's a chance for Florida State to pull the unthinkable. It'll obviously have a lot of hype just because it's two name brand teams, but Clemson should win that one easily. So there's my Power 5 conference predictions. You can read them at 247sports.com in their totality and weigh in on what you think. Of course, I will be wrong. Or maybe no, I won't be wrong. I'm always right with that stuff. I'm always right. Any questions, guys and gals? I am open to answering any questions and talking about anything you guys want to. Outside of predictions and everything, next week, we haven't scheduled them out, but I recorded a social distance episode today. Recording another one Monday. Both media personalities kind of get their take on a lot of things going on in college football and sports and life. And then we got some other good guests lined up that others are interviewing. And if you guys have any suggestions or recommendations for maybe who we should bring on our social distance series, which has been very popular, we're all ears. Let us know. We'd love to hear them. Anyway, well, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat there. So I'm probably just going to end it here. Those were my Power 5 projections. Of course, don't hold me to them, but you will. I know you will. I know Georgia fans definitely will in the SEC when I've got Florida above them. Man, are they mad. They are super mad. All right, guys. All right, thanks, Jack. Thanks, Tony. Looking good. Hope you're enjoying the promotion. I am very much. Just trying to keep my head above water and do all the work I can to provide some good coverage here on the national scene. But those are my predicted order of finishes. And we'll have much more at 247sports.com. There's a piece up today focusing on running backs. Running Back U, who's currently producing the best running backs. Go check that out from Barton Simmons. And we also got some other stories about running backs across the country kind of packaged in with that story. So, thank you guys. Thanks for joining me. I will see you down the road.